This is lecture 75 in the ABCs of Communism, Bolshevism 2018, volume 6, chapter 86, when you get it, and it's on South Africa's primitive communism. Now, South Africa has over 3 million years of occupation by Homo, actually almost 4 million now. By Southern Africa, I include Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, South African Republic, Swaziland, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique. Now, a half century ago, when I began my archaeological studies, Southern Africa had the Tong site, and East Africa had Louis Leakey's first finds in Olduvai Gorge. And we're going to take a look at a map here in a few minutes to show you where some of these sites are. But at any rate, today, South Africa alone has one of the world's longest archaeological records. In total, in South Africa, we're talking about 3.5 million square kilometers that encompass the broadest spectrum of environments. East Africa, as we saw in the last lecture, has the Kafouan pre-Oldowan tools that are at least 700,000 years pre-Oldowan. And of course, that half century that has just passed has witnessed the liberation from white rule of South and East Africa. Now, in 1924, Raymond Dart discovered the Homo australopithecus, or Homo africanus fossil. This first grade of Homo evolved into the Homo erectus grade by 2 million years ago. Anyway, Dart's colleague, Professor Robert Burns Young from Buxton Lime Works, had sent Dart 2 crates of fossils from the small town of Tong in the northwest province of South Africa. Now, upon seeing the fossils, Dart immediately recognized one as being an early human because its brain dimensions were too large for a baboon or a chimpanzee. Blasting had exposed a breccia-filled cave producing the child's skull and several fossilized monkeys and hyraxes. Now, De Bruyn had noticed their unusual nature in November 1924 and informed the Limeworks manager, Mr. A.E. Spears. Dart's closest ally was Robert Broom, whose discoveries of further Australopithecines, as well as Wilfred Le Gros Clark's support, eventually vindicated Dart, so much so that in 1947 Sir Arthur Keith said Dart was right and I was wrong. Keith made this statement referring to his dismissal and skepticism of Dart's analysis of the Tong child originally as an early human ancestor. Keith thought it was more likely to be an ape. Yet later research by Broom confirmed Dart's theories, and Dart's theories were also popularized by playwright, screenwriter, and science writer Robert Ardrey. First in an article published in The Reporter and reprinted in Science Digest, and later in Ardrey's influential 4-volume Nature of Man series. Raymond Dart proposed the idea of a dual evolutionary origin of the neocortex. During his research in the 1930s in Africa, he studied the architecture of reptilian brains, and he was able to identify what he named the primordial neocortex as the oldest form of the neocortex in a reptile. He identified a distinction between the cytoarchitecture in an area that split it into a para-hippocampal and a para-pyriform region. In 1956, the Institute of the Study of Man in Africa was established at Witwatersrand in his honor. Dart was the director of the School of Anatomy at the University of Witwatersrand, Johannesburg, until 1958, and there he worked with Philip Tobias, who died in 1912, but at any rate, he continued his work in the study of the, died in 2012, continued his work in the study of the cradle of humankind, where this area, which is what the government calls this area near Witwatersrand and Johannesburg, which I'll show you on the map, and he continued his work in this study of the cradle of humankind and other paleoanthropological sites. In 1959, an autobiographical account of Dart's discoveries, entitled Adventures with the Missing Link, was published, and in that book he acknowledges the crucial role played by his first female student and demonstrator, Josephine Salmons. She brought to his attention the existence of a fossilized baboon skull at the house of Mr. E.G. Izod, director of the Northern Lime Company and proprietor of a quarry in Tong. The skull was kept as an ornament on the mantelpiece above the fireplace at his house. In bringing the skull to show Professor Raymond Dart, she set in motion a chain of events that led to the discovery of the child skull of Tom. She later became the wife of Professor Cecil Jackson, professor of anatomy at Onderstpoort Veterinary Institute in the University of Pretoria. At the age of 73, Dart began dividing his time between South Africa and the Institutes for the Achievement of Human Potential, an organization founded by Glenn Doman. Dart spent much of the next 20 years working with the IAHP, an organization that treats brain-injured children. His own son, Galen Dart, had suffered motor damage during his birth in 1941, and so Dart had a special interest. Raymond Dart died in Johannesburg in 1988 and was survived by his wife and children. Now, reaching back over 3 million years, southern Africa possesses one of the world's richest fossil hominid assemblages, focused around what is popularly referred to as the cradle of humankind near Johannesburg. The oldest stone tool industries there are the Lower Stone Age or Lower Paleolithic Kafuan, Oldowan, and the Acheulean complexes. In recent decades, research efforts have focused on the Middle Stone Age or Middle Paleolithic. Major sites like Blombos, Deep Kloof, Klaasies River, and Sibudu feature the invention of many complex technologies. Finally, later Stone Age or Upper Paleolithic and Mesolithic hunters and gatherers of the last 25,000 years has been assisted by ethnographic studies of recent Bushmen, the San hunter-gatherers in the Kalahari Desert. These people have a rich heritage of rock art. For the last 2 millennia, hunters and gatherers have shared southern Africa with people practicing other forms of subsistence, namely stone-using pastoralists, iron-working African farmers, many of whom engaged in trading networks that spread far beyond Africa's shores, with results that include autochthonous, class-divided kingdoms and urban centers. And eventually, of course, European settlers invaded. Southern Africa's size and the complexity of its archaeology have resulted in a few general overviews of the region as a whole, as opposed to those focusing on specific periods or areas. Clark, in 1959, wrote a book that, although it's out of date in many respects, nevertheless retains useful insights about this area. Coverage of both paleo-environmental issues and farming communities is much stronger in Klein's 1984 book, reflecting the major developments in these areas in the intervening quarter of a century. And from a single author, in 2002, Dr. Mitchell is the most comprehensive and detailed survey in his book, but necessarily omits results from the past 15 years. Chapters in edited books on African archaeology include Stahl in 2005, Mitchell and Lane in 2013, that mitigate all of this and provide detailed introductions with important reference lists, although not reviewing all aspects of the region's past. Blundell in 2006 and Sudial in 2006 also offer wide coverage. And in your book, when you get it, I have all of this, the references here. So if those of you that have a need to know or are interested can reference these primary sources immediately. Journals, especially those based in Southern Africa, are an essential resource and constitute an important outlet for new research and occasional overviews of particular topics. However, information about many excavations and survey projects remain restricted to postgraduate dissertations and honors, master's, and doctoral levels, and increasingly to reports from contract archaeologists. Access to these documents varies widely, but there is an increasing trend to making them available online, for example, via the South African Heritage Resources Agency. I'm going to stop here for a moment because I took advantage of the break that we were having there for our guys that are working on the lawn outside to get this map pulled up so that you can take a look at where some of these sites are. And we had just mentioned the Tong Child and a few other things. Let me just start out by showing all of this area is what the government now calls the cradle of humankind. It's around Pretoria, Johannesburg, and the Tong Child is the Tong Mine site right up there. All of these are the very earliest sites we're now going to be taking a look at. And I want to mention a few books to you that will be of interest to some of you that have a need to know about these things, and to some of you that would just like to know about them. First of all, a book edited by Jeff Blundell called Origins, the story of the emergence of humans and humanity in Africa, published in 2006. The full references, of course, will be in your book when you get it. John Desmond Clark's older book, 1959 book, The Prehistory of Southern Africa. Richard Klein edited a book called Southern African Prehistory and Paleoenvironments, published in the Netherlands in 1984. Peter Mitchell published a book in 2002 called The Archaeology of Southern Africa at Cambridge University Press. In 2013, Peter Mitchell and Paul Lane edited a book called The Oxford Handbook of African Archaeology, which you definitely want to get your hands on if this is your area of interest, in 2013. And there are 70 different articles in that book, the Oxford Handbook of African Archaeology, so they're bringing you up to date as late as 4 years ago. Himla Sudial wrote a book, or edited the book, The Prehistory of Africa, Tracing the Lineage of Modern Man, published in South Africa in 2006. And there's another one that I want to mention called African Archaeology, A Critical Introduction, in 2005 by Anne Stahl as the editor. And there's also the Oxford Bibliographies online, available by subscription and or perpetual access to institutions. Now, the South African sequence of Old Stone Age Lower Paleolithic cultures covers the entire region of southern peninsular Africa. That is, this whole area right here. Geologically, it's the most ancient and without any large-scale faulting, rift, or volcanic eruptions. It includes northern Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Angola, as well as South Africa and Namibia. So the pluvial and interpluvial sequence is the basis of most of the archaeological chronology, with radiometric dates thrown in here and there. Now, just to reiterate, pluvials and interpluvials correspond to glacials and interglacials in Europe and North America. So, for example, the geology of the Upper Pleistocene and the glacial sequence, actually the geology of the entire Pleistocene, the glacial sequence in Europe and North America is the most recent is the worm and the Wisconsin, and that's the Gambian pluvial, and it's as Upper Paleolithic archaeologically. And then we have the Reese Illinoisan, the Kangeran pluvials, and the Middle Paleolithic, which also includes the Mindel and the Kansan, and the Kamasian pluvial, and finally the Guntz and Nebraskan and the Kajeran pluvial that have the Lower Paleolithic site at Malapa Cave as an important type site. Now, the cultural sequence consists of evidence found in the terraces of the valley and from some well-excavated cave sites. The erosional and aggradational phases of the river Val, under the spell of climatic changes, have recorded the cultural sequence, and the most ancient parts of the archaeology of South Africa come from the Cradle of Humanity area right in here, around Johannesburg, the Western Cape, and which is down here, and Sterkfontein and Swartkrans, which you'll see on the map and any map, and are famous names in archaeology. Now, the Malapa Cave is a fossil-bearing site located about 9 miles northeast of the well-known South African hominid fossil sites of Sterkfontein and Swartkrans. It's inside the area of the Cradle of Humanity, of Humankind and World Heritage Site, and the human fossils there are Homo australopithecine grade and exhibit excellent hand structures. So this is important, of course, when we're taking a look at man the tool maker. There's an excellent National Geographic hour-long program by Professor Lee Berger on the internet that you can access by typing its title into your browser, Part 8, Part Human, The Fossils of Malacca. In short, initially there were approximately 130 known cave sites in the Malacca region and around 20 fossil deposits. By July of 2008, the pattern of cave distribution seen on Google Earth by Berger, as well as the recognition of what these deposits looked like from satellites and significant amounts of searching on the ground, had led Berger to discover almost 500 caves that scientists had not plotted or identified previously. And included in this were more than 25 fossil sites that had been unknown to science, all in probably the most explored region in Africa. So this phenomena of Google Earth, a map of which we're using right here, had made a tremendous contribution to the origin of humanities studies. Berger brought in a geologist named Paul Dirks, at that time head of School of Geosciences at the University of the Witwatersrand, to lead the geological aspects of this exploratory project. And in late July 2008, Professor Berger noted in Google Earth a series of caves running along a fault that pointed to a blank area in the region, an area that appeared to have clusters of trees that typically marked cave deposits. On the 1st of August of 2008, he dropped off Professor Dirks to map the recognized cave system and proceeded into the uninvestigated area with his dog Tao, a ridgeback, who accompanied him on almost all his explorations. Almost immediately he discovered a rich fossil site that was unknown previously to science, near more than 36 caves that had been apparently unrecognized by previous researchers. So on the 15th of August 2008, Professor Berger returned to this site with his postdoctoral student, Dr. Job Keeby, and his 9-year-old son, Matthew Berger. Within minutes, Matthew had discovered the first remains of early human ancestors, a clavicle, that is a collarbone, on the opposite side of the original find. Professor Berger quickly discovered a jawbone with a canine tooth of a hominid. The find soon would be prepared and identified as a partial skeleton of a juvenile hominid that dated around 9 to 13 years of age. On the 4th of September of 2008, Berger returned to the site with more than a dozen colleagues, where he discovered a second partial skeleton of an adult female. And in April 2017, Ann Gibbons, reporting from a Paleoanthropological Congress in New Orleans, concludes that a date of 1.8 million years ago is the best date on these particular human remains for the moment. Now, the Cafuan is the earliest African Paleolithic industry, and it's associated with the mammalian assemblage called the Cafuan Philofranchian. This pre-Stellenbosch site emerges during the Kageran First Pluvial, which I was just mentioning above, and you'll see it in a chart so you can quickly, when you get your book, so you can quickly place yourself in time and environmental sequence. Ascending from it was the Oldowan pebble tool tradition. So the Lower Paleolithic hand axe tradition and flake tool tradition arose from the Cafuan and the Oldowan during the Middle Pleistocene period. The basal stage of Old Stone Age in South Africa can be correlated with the European Chilean-Achulian cultural tradition. Following the sequence of East Africa here, culture begins with a pebble culture of Cafuan type. Now, for our purposes, you want to focus on the fact that these are the very first primitive communists anywhere in the world. Now, gradually it develops into a stage where the tools are similar to Oldowan culture in all essential respects. Therefore, this pre-Stellenbosch stage is composed of Cafuan and Oldowan types of stone tool industries. The period corresponds to the first pluvial period, the Kageran, and the subsequent interpluvial or Kageran-Kamasian period. These pre-Stellenbosch sites have the earliest lithic industries of South Africa, beginning with the tools of the Cafuan culture, which are the first tools made by primitive communists, and continued in its developed form as the Oldowan culture. Oldowan then evolves into the Abavillian, Chilean, hand axe cultures, and the hand axe complex found in pre-Stellenbosch is a developed form of this Oldowan culture. Which brings us to the Stellenbosch stages. Now, back in 1899, Louis Perenghi discovered Paleolithic stone tools of the Acheulean type at a site named Bozeman's Crossing near the Adam Tass Bridge at the western edge of Stellenbosch. Now, the type site is located near to the Cape of Good Hope, where numerous Acheulean types of tools are in stratigraphic succession. Now, the Stellenbosch temporally, the Stellenbosch stage corresponds to the second pluvial and interpluvial period, and the Stellenbosch Lower Paleolithic industry uses hard rock, especially a dark medium-grade igneous rock, typically with ophitic texture, containing plagioclase, pyroxene, and olivine. It occurs in dikes and sills called dolerite. These tool makers, not dolomite, which is a limestone and magnesium carbonate, but dolerite. These tool makers invented the prepared hard rock core. The oldest tortoise or Proto-Lavoisian cores are found in association with the Acheulean industry in the Victoria West and Cape Province. It's used in making tools on hard rocks, including hand axes and cleavers, and is proof of the transition from Oldowan. The Stellenbosch culture has 5 stages, beginning with the first. The tools of Stellenbosch I stage are made on pebbles, boulders, or cobbles. Chipping was done from 2 directions to form a sharp cutting edge, effective for cutting, chopping, and scraping. The striking platform was obliquely slanted. This technique of flaking is of the Clactonian-Chellian type. Sometimes the tools are flaked all around, giving a biconical shape. The pebbly cortex remains on one side. Then, above that is Stellenbosch II. This stage is recovered from the old gravel layer 1 of the second pluvial period, the Communism. The core tools of this stage do not show any specialty. The flake tools have an unfaceted striking platform that forms a less obtuse angle with the main flake surface than its predecessors. The technique is comparable to the Lower Acheulean of Europe and East Africa. Stellenbosch III stage is also found in the old gravel layer 1 of the Communism pluvial period. The characteristic feature here is the occurrence of Lavoisian flakes with faceted striking platforms. Horizontal flaking is very common in these tools. Stellenbosch IV is the stage found in the old gravel layer 2 that was deposited during the second interpluvial, that is, the Communism-Kangeran period. Artifacts include flakes with unifaceted or unfaceted striking platforms, discovered in association with Upper Acheulean flake tools with prepared or faceted striking platforms, and the characteristic and plentiful tools are cleavers with rectangular and trapezoid cross sections. And that brings us to Stellenbosch V, a stage found in the old gravel layer 2 corresponding to the Communism-Kangeran interpluvial period. The characteristic tools are thick and flat core tools, having longitudinal flaking all over the surface. Another feature is the application of cylinder hammer technique in the manufacture of flake tools. Stellenbosch II, III, IV, and V are the South African Acheulean. Stage 1 resembles the Chellian of Europe. However, the South African Lower Paleolithic hand axe complex contains hand axes, cleavers, and crude flakes. Flakes are struck from Victoria West type of hard rock cores by means of the Victoria West technique of the Sangoan stage. The Sangoan, that is almost like Foursmith in East Africa, is characterized by Lavoisian flakes, stratigraphically follows the Stellenbosch. The type site of Sangoan industry is at the Sangoan Bay of Lake Victoria in Uganda, which is farther up here. But at any rate, the Sangoan stage occurs below the lowest stratum of lower pluvial or Gamblean deposition. The characteristic tools are discoid cores, large flakes, points, side scrapers, and denticulates. Evolved types of hand axes and flakes of typical Lavoisian are found in plenty, and this means that the Sangoan has replaced the Foursmith in Uganda. A lone site of South Africa and another in southern Zimbabwe offer a specialized facies, and that's this area right in here, specialized facies of hand axe industry on pebbles in association with the utilized flakes. Most of these tools are prepared on jasper and fine-grained siliceous rocks. The most common types are end scrapers made by Lavoisian technique, and Professor H.L. Bruhl sees this as a separate stage with the name Hope Fountain. In any event, the stage is equivalent to the Sangoan. And the concluding phase of the Old Stone Age in South Africa corresponds with the fourth pluvial period, the Gambian. 3 stages of cultural succession have been found here. And that takes us to the Middle Paleolithic of broad-spectrum hunting and gathering in the Proto-Stilbay. The Sangoan, or Farsmith industry, develops further to give rise a cultural complex of Mousterian, Lavoisian tradition. The tools of this stage are hand axes, U-shaped cleavers, flake tools, and large circular prepared cores. Stilbay evolves from the Proto-Stilbay. Now this culture features a pressure flaking technique of European Mousterian that was completely adopted by the people of Africa at the late phase of the Old Stone Age, as flakes came from tortoise-shaped prepared cores. So everywhere in the latter Stone Age you have this Lavoisian technique. The tools include pressure-flaked points, burins, and scrapers, and this Stilbay culture is found outside of South Africa and Kenya and Uganda, and I would again recommend that you type Lavoisian into your browser and you'll come up with a very nice moving picture diagram of how a tortoise-shaped core is made, why it's important in itself, and why its flakes are important. Now, the evolved Farsmith in the deposits of the Gambian pluvial period, there are 2 strata that have been identified. First, the recent gravel stratum and lower terrace stratum of Stilbay and Proto-Stilbay cultures that are in this gravel stratum, and then the evolved Farsmith lies in the lower terrace. The tools of the evolved Farsmith are straight-backed bladelets, burins, and scrapers. And these tool types correspond temporally to the Upper Paleolithic and Mesolithic stage of Europe. The Lavoisian technique exhibited by the Sangoan or Farsmith culture was perfected in the evolved Farsmith. After the Gambian pluvial period, when the climate and the late Stone Age industries correspond to the Mesolithic in Europe appeared. Now, the South African Lower Paleolithic then has a Homo australopithecus and Homo erectus grades, and we can summarize it as follows. Beginning 4 million years ago, we have the Australopithecus southern ape. These first-grade homogeneous ancestors walked upright and had longer thighs and shorter arms than other primates. The earliest species were partially tree-dwelling. These earliest Australopithecines roamed the African savannas from 4 million years ago to at least 2 million years ago. From 3 million BP, we have the discovery of the oldest complete fossilized hominid or human-like skeleton in South Africa, announced on 9 December 1998, and it's proven that Australopithecus africanus roamed the area much further back than was estimated before. The geomagnetism laboratory has dated that skeleton between 3.22 and 3.58 million years old at the University of Liverpool. 2.5 million years ago, we have the skull of Mrs. Pless and the STS-14 skeleton belonging to the species Australopithecus africanus, and discovered at the Sterkfontein caves in 1947. Again, these indicate, and those caves again are in this particular area. These indicate that distant relatives of mankind inhabited the area at the time. The age of the fossils are estimated to be 2.6 to 2.8 million years, and these fossils prove again and again how mankind evolved originally in Africa. 2 million years ago, we have Homo erectus in our system. or a very advanced Homo australopithecus grade hominid that made the first clearly associated stone tools of that period in eastern Africa. Homo habilis is the name assigned by the discoverer and means handyman, but it is at any rate just a very advanced Australopithecine or a beginning Homo erectus. And this specimen had an increased brain size roughly 1,000 cubic centimeters of cranial capacity and lived from the period 2.2 to 1.8 million years ago, and one of the first members of the genus Homo proven to have made these kinds of early stone tools in South Africa. 1.5 million years ago we have a Homo erectus. The discoverer calls it Homo ergaster. So it spread throughout Africa and lived 1.8 to 1 million years ago. And by 1 million years BP we have a Homo erectus or Homo ergaster that leaves Africa. Some individuals left Africa before 2 million years ago and spread through Arabia to the Caucasus and into the base of the Himalayas, arriving by 2 million years ago. They were hunters and gatherers and made stone tools such as hand axes, cleavers, and choppers. And that takes us to a conclusion of this particular lecture. And in the next one we're going to go on to Namibia.